Hello, our dear lurkers out there. We are back with another episode of the Third Age Babylon 5 podcast. For those who still don't know us, which is really embarrassing if you don't, but well, it's okay. We are three Europeans that were too young when the series was the first time around, but we are watching it now for the upteenth time, the second time, and for the first time. So you have very different perspectives on every episode we are discussing. We are Alex, Layla, and my name is Meike. And today it's the episode 17, which is called Legacies. But before we jump to our discussion, first we have to go around with our introduction question, which is today: how would you get rid of a body? Who wants to start? Who has the most pressing problem there?
I think you have the most plan.
What? Me?
I would expect so.
Okay, wait, let me start this way. I always wonder when I innocently watch movies or TV shows or whatever, I always wonder why people put a body in any kind of water, like in a river or in a big lake or something, because it's just so clear that it will show up and that it will probably show up whenever you want it the least to show up. So, I don't know. I was always thinking that burning a body would be good, but of course you need like a good reason to make a big fire, which I think is easier to come up with than other things. So just, cremate it when nobody can notice. I think that's probably one of the best. And I mean, also putting it in your freezer. I mean, what if you just at some point just, I don't know, acted weird and your neighbor calls the cops and suddenly they search your freezer? That's also not a good idea. So really, I think I'll stick with you burning it. I would make a big bonfire party and then always put little body pieces into it so that no one notices.
So I guess your best time here in Germany for burning or getting rid of a body would be on Easter.
Yes, our Easter fires. We have fires on the Saturday of the Easter weekend. Everywhere, big bonfires. That would be one, or St. Martin's. This our version of Thanksgiving, kind of, where you go like with your lanterns, and then also some people afterwards make a bonfire, which would be even more fun to get rid of a body because you always have a priest watching you, and that's. Yeah.
But that's like 2 opportunities per year. I think that like covers your bases pretty well.
Yeah, so that's me. I have not given it much thought before. No.
I mean, you mentioned putting stuff into water, which is not the greatest plan because it tends to float back up again. I always wonder, there's a surprising amount of true crime cases that involve cooking. Like, in the vast majority of these, nobody gets eaten. Like, cannibalism is not that common, but a lot of people just kind of instinctively go, I have a big hunk of meat, I need to get rid of it. I guess it's stewing time. And I don't know, maybe I would just go with that trend. I feel like if you just like manage to can it up and like store it somewhere, then that's the easiest way to get rid of it.
I have to admit, if I would go your way, I would rather do it in the sense of where you have to go to a party and bring something to eat. I mean, it's gone directly. I mean, no one can find this. I mean, if it's not getting eaten, well, then
you're not cooking enough. That's not part of the problem, right?
How is this movie called? Oh, sorry. How is this movie called? It's a musical. It's a...
Sweeney Todd, is it?
It is Sweeney Todd. I'm stupid. Yeah. See, that works.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. I think I would be... the one who would try to melt the body with chemicals in her bathtub and just rinse it out.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a biochemist here, so I would just send him. I mean, he has keys for the university, so I would just send him there and tell him, bring me the right stuff back, and then I just would flush it down the sink or whatever.
I mean, probably people at some point would ask questions what your chemicals were for, but you have a pretty good chance that they cannot really point it out. That's actually really clever,
No, it's just, I mean, it's a reason why it is the Breaking Bad way of doing it, right? It's the mainstream way of doing it, which is why we didn't show us that we are too much into counterculture, you see.
Is it done in yeah, you just said the name and I already forgot.
Like, this is where everybody famously learned that you shouldn't do it in the bathtub because it might corrode the bathtub as well, and then everything leaks.
Yeah, oh my god, that scene. Oh yeah. Oh.
This is why you want plastic containers, but you can get those. It's fine. But okay, so
like I said, I have a biochemist here, so I'm sure you will find a way.
having an accomplice
I would
immediately.
like to do it, so I have nothing to do with it. I didn't do anything.
Already constructing an alibi. This is why we are making this. This is why we have to announce very clearly when and where we are making this recording, just to be sure.
Well, I was just thinking. Well, I'm saying this now, but what happens when someone sees this and the next time we have to call the plumber because our water isn't running out of the rinse? So
we all should hope there's no murder in our immediate vicinity, like for the next half year after this episode. Otherwise, this might become a problem. Yes.
Yeah, I think so too. Damn it. Well. Well, what a lovely transition to our episode for today. Well, to the synopsis, the shortest version is we have, on one hand, a dead Minbari Warrior from who was back there on the line fighting in the war, and on the other hand, we have a telepath girl who, she's just discovered as a telepath. And, well, the body goes missing. The girl has to decide where she will live in the future, if it's Psycorps or, I don't know, wherever. And, that's basically it about the episode, without spoilering anything.
That's a pretty good synopsis right there, so I guess we can jump right into our first impressions. How did this one land?
Well, I was happy to get a few informations about, especially about the war and everything, and a bit more about the Minbari culture. On the other hand, it was a soft episode. It wasn't like something with big action or anything. I liked watching it. It was rather quick to watch. When the episode ended, I was like, oh, it's already over. Okay. So I guess certainly worthwhile, though not as deep as other episodes were so far, but it was a nice one for me.
Okay, that's a pretty balanced review right there. How about you, Layla?
Yes, the same for me. I think it's definitely, I used that word too much, but it's an interesting one. It's one that I enjoyed watching, but I liked it. I think let's keep it with that. I just liked it. It was a nice episode to watch.
Very short and sweet, and I think I will just follow your lead there. I liked it as well. Every so often, especially with season 1 episodes, there's one that kind of triggers in my mind a chain reaction, and then I have like this big rant that I want to go on, and this happened for me on this watch through with this episode. But this is why I'm extra excited to talk about it a little bit, because there are a handful of things in here that I never really paid much attention to, but on this watch through really struck a chord with me, and they have a lot to do with what you, Meike, mentioned, learning more about the Minbari in this one. So no, I'm very excited to talk about it. So if everybody is fine with that, should we start with the main bulk of the episode, our body gone missing?
Just roll with it.
Okay, then, let me just put the thing that has been stewing on my mind since we watched it yesterday, and maybe this is going to be an interesting starting point, or maybe not, but this episode is all about exploring the growing rift between the warrior caste and the religious caste. I think this is the first time we really get a good look at the warrior caste, right? Yeah, and for me this is very interesting because this explores sort of the relationship of a military and the rest of society, which is something I think is a very prescient issue that Babylon 5 touches on there, because, nowadays this is something that is always talked about. How do you deal with veterans returning from war? How do you deal with the consequences mentally and physically of war? How do you deal with the fact that, especially right now in Europe, all the nations are kind of reckoning with the fact that, oh yeah, having a functioning military is more important than ever. And in a lot of media, this is usually explored in this direction. You don't want the military to take over the society, right? If you remember watching the reboot of Battlestar Galactica, this is a big topic. Or you look at Star Trek with the Klingons as an example. There's often this idea, you don't want the military to replace your government, right? That's usually a bad thing in real life. But this episode feels like it's almost doing the polar opposite, where it shows us the Minbari as a society where the military is completely separated from everything else. It's its own little caste where the people look different, from the way they dress to their head crests, and everything they do is slightly different. And it goes a little bit into the tensions that arise from that, from basically taking the entirety that is the military and shoving it into this extra bubble of your society. And I just find that very interesting.
Yeah, interesting, but I think also problematic, because if you're in this military bubble, the military stuff, the way you plan your day and everything is so disconnected from, I want to say the real life, the not war life, the ones who are, the calmer, the peaceful part. Therefore, I would be worried that it's going, that it would be going more in the direction of a pro-war, direction. Because if you have big army and everything, if there's just peace, they kind of, that the existence is like unnecessary, or at least in this scale, or that, at least that would be my worry.
I think I completely agree with that it creates, like, it doesn't seem like an ideal setup that they are having, right? This entire idea that Dylan also keeps explaining to us that they're the warrior caste and it's dangerous that they're drifting apart from us, and it doesn't seem like the society really has a way of dealing with this. And if we look at real life examples, you have soldiers coming back from war, and if they enlisted at a very young age, integrating them back into society is a problem. And now you look at the Minbari and they just don't do that. They just let the warriors stew on their own. And I mean, Dylan mentions this, when the war is over and peacetime comes, one of the warriors just straight up commits suicide because he has just suddenly no purpose in life anymore. And especially for a 90s show, talking about the fact that, hey, if you have a bunch of warriors and you just tell them it's over now without helping them out, that might lead to this kind of problems, this kind of even self-harm. I feel like that's a topic that's talked about much more nowadays than it was back when the show was aired, but it's nonetheless very valid.
I was just wondering, now that we talk about that the Minbari just have this big military and that put them into one caste where they exist in this military world. That is not. It's not. I mean, it's. Do we know what that is in numbers? Like, it's basically half of society. At
least from what Dylan has described by now, there's the religious caste and there's the military caste.
Yes, I mean, that is the society. You are either in the religious caste or you are part of this big military. So I don't know. I mean, I think this problem that we have have a society that is kind of diverse, and we have people who come back from war and cannot integrate back. I think that would also look different in the Minbari world, because there's just not this big society and the small military. There's just either you are in the religious caste or you are in the warrior caste. So I think the warrior caste has a lot of more to say in the daily life of a Minbari, because you only have these two options.
It does.
Just one thought of mine. I would be interested to see if there are Minbari who have a problem with this binary existence in their culture, because I think it's rather limited.
It is. And I mean, we see even Dylan, who seems to be like very much a paragon of the religious caste, kind of struggling with the fact that here you have somebody that she was a close friend with who switched from one caste into the other.
But it's interesting to know that you can do that. Yeah.
That was one of our questions. I think I'm not sure which episode we throw in this, but I think it's rather interesting to see that you can switch. I would be interested to see if this is generally the case or just because of the circumstances, the war circumstances here. But yeah, well, there's some sort of way at least.
There is definitely some sort of way, although I suspect it's an exception rather than the rule, because we learned that the war broke out and this guy who was a high priest was forced to become a war leader, and then he stayed a war leader, even 10 years after the war is ended. So it doesn't feel like if he really, and Dylan talks about this, like he always wanted to be a priest first. If that was really the case, if it would have been easy, I suspect he would have just changed back, but that never happened. So maybe it's just a societal obligation that he had, or maybe there's literally just no mechanism to do this, but it certainly seems like it's not that easy to do, and maybe just something that's, like you say, Meike, under special circumstances can happen.
What I found interesting that when Dylan was, what was the other guy's name? It was something with an Neroon. When they were discussing later about the circumstances of the body, it was about the heritage of the dead guy was named, I think, Brenmer.
Brenmer.
That his father was from the warrior caste and that his mother was from the religious caste. And I'm not sure how Dylan phrased it, but it sounded to me like the mother's side had more impact or more importance. I'm not sure how to understand that, if it's generally that the heritage of the mother is regarded higher or something, or that it's the religious part because they were both religious. There are a lot of ways to interpret this, but I found this rather interesting to hear.
And you would assume there has to be like some kind of mechanism to determine if this mixed marriage exists, who the child belongs to, so that it's matrilineal kind of makes sense, right? It's a 50-50 chance that it's going to be one or the other. And there's definitely also, when you talk about heritage, this entire extra layer that we learn. Yes, the castes are very important to the Minbari, but their society also revolves a lot around these clans. Like, this guy is not just warrior class, but he's part of the Star Rider clan, and honoring and dishonoring this kind of unit is also something very important, apparently. So we see there's certainly more diverse like categories within the Minbari society than just this binary, but that seems to be like something that is very much governing anything. And at least I'm curious what your impressions were from this episode, but at least to me it also seems in this episode especially like there is somewhat of a hierarchy going on, where at least right now the religious caste is very much in charge because it is peacetime, and basically the entire plot revolves around the fact that Dylan, as a religious caste authority figure, decides what is going to happen, and basically also tells Neroon at any point what he's going to do, and he just has to accept that because she's in a position of authority. And we learn the same about the Minbari War, where it ends because the religious caste says, we are surrendering. So at least in this situation, it's kind of this idea. You have this binary and this very big military caste, but for the moment, they seem to be somewhat on the back foot. I mean, we have two Minbari representing all of the Minbari on Babylon 5, and both of them are religious castes.
Yes, but I mean, I'm not so sure at this point actually what we get to know about the Grey Council as the show goes on. So it's interesting for me because this question that I have in my mind right now, I could not answer. But I think this could also depend on who is voted into the Grey Council.
Certainly, yeah.
Yes, that would have been something I would have been wondering about. Is it just, is it voted, or is it, I don't know, something where someone just draws your name out of a pot, or is it a mixed council from both sides? Is it just one cast there? So up until now, I think we don't know answers to this yet.
So I think maybe what cast has what kind of influence can also depend on how the Grey Council is built in that exact moment in time.
And it will also depend a little bit on what the Grey Council really is, because it certainly is some kind of ruling body of the Minbari for sure, but at the same time we know Delenn is part of something important, but you know, it's a little bit like saying that the Minbari have a president. That can mean a lot of things. Is it like the executive in chief, or is it, you know, more a figurehead here? And it's hard with the Grey Council to tell like how exactly this functions. We learn here certainly that Delenn holds a hell of a lot of authority, but you know, she doesn't seem to be involved in the governing of the Minbari as a whole in any capacity.
Oh, I really like to see her telling Neroon off, like, you're not allowed to do this. It was nice to see her really in this power position, because now we have really proof of how powerful she is. It was until now more a bit shady in the background.
Yeah.
And he is clearly facing someone who is not on the same page like her. So
yes, and also to see that these institutions of their society are still working, because he then tells her, he calls her Satai Delenn and completely obeys. So he understands her power and her function in that moment and does not question that.
And we also see like stuff goes beyond that. She had people in place that she can order to get rid of the body. She had people in place who could hide the giant bonfire you need to cremate him, and a ship in place to get him back to Minbar and stuff. So there's clearly also this idea that she has a lot of people that she can call on, that she can trust. So there's certainly a lot of authority here. Although with Delenn, I'm always a little bit mixed in this episode, because on the one hand, it's really great seeing her tell off Neroon in this scene. On the other hand, if I just imagine, okay, but from the perspective of the warrior cast, what has just happened, it's just another instance where a religious leader comes there and says, your entire like wish of like trying to honor the dead leader that you had, yeah, we're not gonna do that. And of course, it's sympathetic because she's the one that we know and she's acting on behalf of the wishes of the dead guy. So I can completely see that, but I can also see why for Neroon this is just really unfair what is happening. So personally, my favorite scene is immediately after that, when we see Sinclair actually like finding a way of fixing this up a little bit and saying, hey, you didn't get to honor your elite like you wanted to, but I could acknowledge him as somebody who fought him. And like when it comes to reconciling the rift between the warrior caste and the rest of the universe, I feel like Sinclair does a lot of the heavy lifting here. He actually initiates a lot more dialogue, and at least to me it seems this comes from this place that in his society these castes don't exist. Sinclair was forced to be both a warrior on the line and a diplomat, which we see in this episode. And with the Minbari, we see these are clearly two different sides of their culture, where the diplomat is Delenn and the warrior is Neroon, and none of these two really have both experiences, so they can't really make that connection that Sinclair can do.
One thing to go back to when Neroon says the first time acknowledge Delenn as Satai, I wasn't quite sure when he first said that if there wasn't a bit of an undertone there, like, oh, now you're playing the Satai card on me. At least it felt a bit to me like that.
Yes, I would like to get back to that later, maybe just make a mental note, because in general the reactions that Neroon either shows or causes in the people around him, I think can tell us a lot of how the castes actually work, but that's a discussion of its own, so we can get back to that. But yeah, mental note.
Definitely. In general, I think paying attention to what Neroon causes in interactions here is a lot of fun, not just with Delenn, but with, yeah, like you say, everyone around him. In general, I enjoy his character in this episode quite a lot. For somebody who just comes in for this weekly episode, he suddenly has a bigger presence. I will not tell you.
I'm here, so you're not gonna get that
Yeah.
information.
So far, the chances are pretty low. We have not seen many recurring characters.
We heard of them just.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing, since you mentioned Sinclair's reconciliation work there, I think he is rather tough in this episode because, I mean, he's faced, even though the guy is dead, he's still faced with a general that gave him a lot of problems, that caused a lot of deaths, and therefore traumatized him. And he still manages, except for one situation where Neroon is really being an ass, he's really, really patient, calm, still trying to make the best judgment for peace, for the best. And I don't know if I had the power, the strength, the energy to do this in this situation. I mean, it is been a while, but still there are things that you don't shake off that easily. So yeah, I'm really impressed here how Sinclair handles it, especially then in the ending saying, hey, I not acknowledge this guy for his actions.
Yes, I totally see that. But I also felt in the end of that scene, I mean, we have now already in our analysis of that episode given it like its own meaning in the Babylon 5 universe, like how he could make this connection that in this parted society of the Minbari is difficult to make. But still, I felt like this act of I honor him as a warrior, although I met him on the line. I think for humans in the 20th or even in the 21st century, writing characters in a setting where this is believable is also a kind of wish fulfillment, isn't it? Like you could just translate it into so many situations. I think that was really written for, as a dream. Probably that's what I felt in that scene.
Yeah, it's also particularly interesting if we talk a little bit about the circumstances of the Battle of the Line, right? Like this is the final confrontation between humans and Minbari, and when we think back to the episode when Sinclair was exploring the hole in his mind and talking about this battle, it was practically a massacre, right? Like his entire squadron got wiped out. So it's also this thing here you have Sinclair who has to tell, I respect this great general's like bravery and valor and his tactical cunning, but you know, the battle the guy was involved in was basically like completely one side. Like there wasn't much heroics to be had in fighting humans at this point when they are making their last desperate stand. So I think there's just this added weight of, I guess you can see that this guy was a good commander, but honestly, like this isn't like two equal fighters like clashing with one another and then recognizing each other's strength. Like Sinclair was never in a position to do something like this, so it makes his gesture here just even bigger. And Meike, you mentioned it's been 10 years. I really appreciated this first scene where the war cruiser shows up and we get Garibaldi's and Sinclair's reaction to this, because I think they really sold this idea that, yeah, it's been 10 years, but over these 10 years, they haven't seen a ship like this very often. So as soon as that happens, it brings you right back. And like with any trauma, if it doesn't really matter how much time has passed, if there's a certain trigger that brings you right back into it, that makes it pretty much impossible to really deal with that, with this sort of distance.
Certainly. So even, let's leave it out. The idea of the reconciliation work is badly written in the sense of unrealistic. Let's leave that out and just think about the thing why or how Sinclair is able to do this or is doing this. So either I would say he is doing this with the thought of, I do this to make the future better, to close the rift, to make it easier to talk to each other, which would be a really awesome way of doing this, because going over your own emotions this heavily to make the future a better place is something I don't think a lot of people can do, especially if you're wounded personally so deep. On the other hand, I could think of that it's somehow connected why the Minbari ended this war, because they looked in his mind, or whatever it is they have done to him, whatever happened there had some sort of impact on the Minbari to say, okay, we don't continue this war. So yeah, maybe this is something connected to this.
But have we agreed on that this scene was written badly?
I wouldn't say badly. I think it's
Badly with what's it called in English?
quotation marks. No, I wouldn't say badly. Just that it's a very big hurdle for him to jump on, right? And
no, I want to clarify that it's not, like I say, it's written bad in the sense of they just fucked up, but it's a really heavy transition there to go to have a character with this past doing this kind of action. So something has to have either happened there for him to be able to go this way, or he was from the beginning a person with this diplomatic, peace concentrated personality for him to make this move, even though he is a part of the he was a soldier. So
like you pointed out, there is definitely in this episode once again the reiteration, whatever the Minbari did, looking into Sinclair's mind, is something that convinced them to end the war in some way. There might be a connection there. And in this episode, we just got the confirmation this was a religious, or at least non-military decision to surrender. It's a religious cast that decided something happened. And I mean, this was basically known already, that there was no military reason to end the war then and there. That would have been completely fine. I wonder...
sorry, keep what you want to say. I just want to throw in here, we got one hint here that the murder of Ducat was part of the reason the Minbari War started.
Yes.
And I think Garibaldi is it who's saying that it
an accident.
Yeah. No.
Yes.
Whatever the circumstances, whoever this person is, there's a tiny little bit of an idea we get now how this shit just was able to start.
Yes, and I think we are also being told that that the war also started by two ships meeting each other and the weapon ports were open. So this gesture that we see here that the ship of the Warrior Cast shows has been misunderstood before. And I think it's interesting that we see humans here for the first time ever understanding this gesture. Like, there was this big gesture that is just culturally accepted among Minbari. It started a big war, and 10 years later, for the first time ever, humans start to understand what it actually meant all those years ago.
And for me, this is also like, it brings us right back to this class division where these ships arrive, they have been like planning to get there, and still the war leader is like, I don't explain myself to you, my gun ports are open, deal with it, I'm just not going to tell you this. And then Delenn has to walk in and gives the explanation. And at this point, I don't even blame the warrior guy here. It's just in their culture, diplomacy is done by the religious caste and war is done by the warrior caste. So he is never going to explain this because that's just not warriors do. And you can see how this is, even in this setting of this episode, set up for failure. This is a terrible system to do diplomacy. It's not great. Like, Delenn could have told Sinclair this at any point beforehand, but she didn't for dramatic effect, I presume. And also, I'm not saying this is badly written or anything. It's just like, yeah, the Minbari are really set in their ways, and these are not very conducive to a peaceful first contact situation or any kind of contact situation.
Yes.
But to bring it back to what Meike said, I also wonder, like, how many dots is Sinclair connecting here? Like, in his mind, I can also imagine he knows there are people on Earth yearning for a rematch, genuinely trying to like kidnap him and get into his mind to figure out what the heck happened for the Minbari to surrender. I wonder if he's kind of like, okay, here's Neroon, this guy that is also yearning for a rematch because he also desperately wants to know what the heck happened on the Minbari side. Honestly, if I can get on his good side somehow, maybe I actually get somebody there who is going to be more forthcoming with information than Dylan has ever been, because that she is secretive and will do stuff on her own is just something that Sinclair just learns again in this very episode, that, you know, she's not above just using her authority and making up religious miracles that everybody else just kind of has to run with.
I love that we are there when a religious miracle is born, but maybe let's talk about Sinclair and about how he's written just for one more thing, because I think, yes, for once he connects a lot of dots in his mind, but also about getting behind the mystery of how the Minbari War started and how it ended. I think he is the human who has the most insight at this point in history. He's the only one who can probably solve the riddle at some point, and he's aware of it. And I think what we see here, what is something that Sinclair realizes, but what is also something I think the writing tries to convey to us, is that every society kind of has these ways in which it functions, and every society is kind of set in its ways, because if it isn't, it's chaos. You know, you need a kind of system that somehow works. And that just causes certain problems and certain conflicts at some point, because things that are normal for you, things that you want to communicate, can blow up easily. And I think what Sinclair is doing here, or the opportunity that he has here, is to be from the outside, to see it, to kind of, I mean, nobody can ever be always neutral, because you have your own background. And if you look at this thing that is going on between these two Minbari casts, he is clearly a neutral person sort of on the outside and can see what everyone is doing. And so he can just gather as much information as he can, and can act in there as someone who's trying to solve things, as someone who sees what both sides kind of need, because he's not a part of both of them. And that is written wonderfully here, I think, and it is written in a way, that is why I said, and this last scene with Neroon, why I called it wish fulfillment, because I think this is really like, you can look through human history in so many different places, and you can just feel like we need these people like him at the right time, at the right place, or we have disasters happen here and there.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think an important part here is not that he is needed as a neutral person, because the Minbari aren't able to do it themselves, because every cast is like in their own bubble, but there's no real connection between them. So they don't step out of their bubble. They don't get another experience, another perspective, another idea. I have to, maybe I'm going too far with this, but I had to think of something I read from Yoko Tawada. She is especially interested in languages and everything. She was originally born in Japan, lived in a lot of places, and came then to Germany. And with learning other languages, she said that she was able to step out of her mother language and see things she didn't realize before, like comparing how she was using I don't even know the English word for it. Seepferdchen?
Seahorses.
Seahorses. Okay, it was that simple. Where she is thinking, okay, it's the she's referring to the German word, but it's also working for the English version. A horse in the sea, and in the Japanese construction, it refers to, I think it was the child of a dragon or something in that direction. But she had to get out of her language to realize that. And I think this kind of explains really good what the problem is with these two casts, because they're just in their own language. So you are not able to grow from this if you're only, sitting in your pot and just getting everything the same.
Yes, and I think that is what easily can happen. I think Of course, we have sometimes we have institutions in cultures and societies that try to be this connection point. We can have societies that are said to have a lot of communication. But I think it easily happens that you need this view from the outside, that you need someone to take you out of it, or that you need someone to intervene with like a fresh perspective. I think that's something that is in need here and there regularly. And so I think Sinclair's really written as this dreams, is this theory, whatever you may call it, of someone who can do that.
And this works really well in line with what we just learned about the Minbari culture when we look at last week's episode. Like, one of the main reasons Lanier is so excited about building a motorcycle is because we learned from him, this is a guy from the religious caste who spent most of his life very sequestered at his monastery and didn't even like really get off this planet before he went to Babylon 5 to serve under the land. So if this is the case, and we learn from the warrior caste that they have similarly like the Star Rider clan who's just doing its own thing. So if you have this idea that there are really these clan groups that are then aligned with these castes, it's very easy to imagine how really these entire cultural and societal circles, like nations with different languages here on Earth, exist within Minbari culture that have these divides between them. So it might quite literally be also a language barrier at some points. Obviously, we don't explore this in the show for convenience sake, but it's not hard to imagine that this is part of it, that there's just really not much interaction. Like, how much religious caste literature can a warrior caste leader easily read? How much of it is easily accessible? That might be a big thing.
Also, how much are you taught it? I mean, I taught German for German as a second language. A lot of times we call it that in Germany, when it is basically refugee children that you teach. And a lot of studies today actually have shown us that you have different personalities in the different languages you speak. It is very subtle. It is not something that you would probably notice or that other people notice about you. But, anyone out there who speaks 2 or 3 languages maybe knows that, okay, some jokes I only do in English or I only do in Spanish. And I think that if you have a society that is completely like this strict, you also kind of don't get the opportunity to explore yourself that way. Why, for me, for my teaching experience, I can tell that if you put children into school and they're not supposed to talk their native language anymore, they are supposed to only talk German, you also take away parts of their personality, parts of their humor, parts of their emotion, part of their own authentic self from them. So you always have to incorporate all of their other experiences that they made in other languages. So yes, we definitely have this Minbari society that limits, I think, the horizon of its members in certain ways, in the way it has been said for a few thousand years by now, which is not something that is exclusive only to them, of course, but here we see that in action very clearly.
And I think in the Minbari we see it very clearly because it is sort of supported by the societal structures like the castes. But I mean, even among humans, Sinclair is pretty special because we have our everyday guy Garibaldi, who is by his side most of the time, and we see like Garibaldi would be not the right man for this episode because like from the very beginning he says, well, getting a Minbari leader here is a terrible idea, it's going to be nothing but trouble, which is correct. Of course, it is nothing but trouble. It almost creates a massive diplomatic crisis, but Garibaldi also has nothing like productive to add to this conversation. Like, okay, so what's your alternative? We just never talk to them. That defeats the purpose of Babylon 5 then. So it's kind of this like, even within human society, and I mean that's not just in the show, that's in real human society as well, there is kind of this idea, it's very easy to look at this and say, well, that is a complicated and difficult situation. We probably shouldn't deal with that because it's very risky, but that's not going to advance this. So
I mean, you can do this as an individual, but you can't do this in a political sense because you have to live together in some way. So
you have to live in the same galaxy at least.
Which of course also is, to Garibaldi's credit, I imagine if he was in a position of having to deal with this, he would be probably better at it. But he kind of has the luxury of being the security chief, so he can just be like, well, from a security perspective, this is a terrible idea. We should not be doing this. Thank God I'm not the diplomat in the room.
But I mean, one thing we can sum it up with for now, and I don't think we're through with that whole plot yet, but you mentioned the last episode. It was the last episode where we had the motorbike ride.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's so nice to see that we have already 2 scenes between humans and Minbari that kind of really point out why we need the station, why we need a place like Babylon 5, which is, you can translate it to, I don't know, nowadays to the United Nations or even to smaller institutions for like more isolated places or whatever. You can translate it to so many situations that you need these places where you can switch perspectives, where you can have shared experience with all of your own perspectives, with all of your own baggage that you bring with. And I think it's so nicely written that we already see the station in action, in how it works, what we want it to do, before the whole real drama of the show actually starts, because we're still in the beginning. So yeah, that's just really nice at this point. I think that we see so many, shared experiences and switched perspectives between human and Minbari, who 10 years ago were enemies to their death. And all because we have the place Babylon 5 here.
And I think exactly what you mentioned also justifies why Babylon 5 needs to be this massive, to like 250,000 people station, this massive city in space, and not just a small place like the, Meike, if we think of the Presidium in Mass Effect, like this individual ring where just a bunch of politicians sit together, because we see in this episode also it doesn't work if you do what the Minbari do and say, we have a meeting place now, let's send our religious cast members there because they are diplomatically well-versed and they are best sorted, and all the warriors that were fighting in the war we are not going to bring there because they are only going to cause trouble. Of course, in the short term, that's a good way of keeping Babylon 5 stable, but ultimately what Sinclair he really shows is he trusts in the concept of Babylon 5 so much that he says, no, give me the troublemakers, give me the people that really hate my guts, because if I can extend a hand to them, that's actually making progress. It doesn't matter, like, even as we are at war, there's probably some humans and some Minbari that can get along, but if I only ever have those interact with one another, that's never going to affect peace on a larger scale. So this is why we want actually like just normal people living on the station with each other.
But also I really love that scene where the body is gone, and in one room I think we have, who do we have there? We have Sinclair, Delenn and Neroon. And he talks and talks and talks, and Delenn is completely in the game, and it's like, yeah, this was a great offense. But then she looks at him, and it's like waiting to intervene. It's like, okay, is he really going to declare war? When do I have to stop him? I love that scene totally. Yeah.
Yes, she the whole time you have like, something is off with her. That's not matching.
Because she really looks at him like, I have to stop him right before he declares the next war, but I have to let him go on.
I mean, it's even added upon when you think about that, always at the back of her mind, she has like, okay, I really want to have like this religious miracle happen, but I also can't risk an actual war breaking out. Like, how long can I keep this lie up, and at what point do I have to kind of play my cards right to get through this, because otherwise this is not going to work out so well.
Yeah. Before we are through with that plot, I have one thing I would like to talk about, like the mental note I made earlier, and it is this, I think if you observe the interaction between Neroon and the other people, like how he reacts and the reaction he causes in the people around, you can learn a lot about how the warrior caste works and how it views the world. Because I think right in the first scene, when the gun pods are open and everyone is like, oh my god, why are they attacking? And then explains how everything works, and then they scan the ship and see like, oh yes, okay, the weapons are not activated, they're only open, like it's really only a gesture. And Delenn leaves, and the first thing Sinclair says, okay, but keep scanning it, and as soon as one thing blinks up, we do something. And the way I see it is that this reaction is kind of like a response wanted. Like, it is kind of that being confronted with this aggressive gesture, you kind of also react, you go on that level, and so you kind of in that moment really view the world how someone in the warrior caste constantly views the world, constantly has this perspective on every interaction and everything. That would be my interpretation of that scene.
No, go ahead.
If I understand right, you think it that in this way, that the warrior caste is like seeing everything through the eyes of, is this going, there could be a potential, not necessarily a war, but at least a fight break out. And therefore we are ready to go at every second.
Yes, always being prepared, always being ready to show full strength and always expecting it from everybody else. And if it is not happening, always also triggering it in everybody else to always focus on that, on this part of life, on this part of personality in anyone you meet. I think.
And I think what plays into this is also their idea of honoring somebody, right? Like I could imagine they place a huge amount of importance on Sinclair in the end saying, hey, this war leader that you wanted to honor, I respect him because he was legitimately a great warrior. And I think in an alternate version, if you want this initial scene go really well, he could always say, okay, we activated our defense grid and Babylon 5 is completely battle ready now because we acknowledge the fact that the guy you bring, the body that you bring belonged to a massive leader who would require this of us, who is still recognized even after death as such a great enemy, as such a great fighter that we feel obligated to show him this level of battle readiness and such. And I feel like on this level, then the Warrior Cast can see, okay, yeah, that matches with us. And I think there is even some wiggle room here of interpreting things in a favorable way. I mean, this then would really remind me on like, how do you deal with Klingons properly in Star Trek? Like you kind of have to get into their gist of how their honor system works. And if you can kind of get into this aggressive behavior, then they'll also at some point just laugh and get off their high horse and kind of get like, okay, you get what we are trying to do and this we can respect. Which, is also something I could see Sinclair succeeding at if he wasn't constrained by Delenn being there and this diplomatic obligation of doing it their religious cast way at the same time. So I can totally see that being part of it.
Yeah. Then another thing that I'm not sure if we have talked about it in detail or if you have anything more to add to it, is what do we think about the way how our religious miracle is created in the end? How do we feel towards that scene and that idea?
I'm very curious what you're thinking about this, Meike, because when it comes to, the religious miracles that we've seen so far in the show, you've been a little bit skeptical, I think, if I remember correctly.
Well, there is religious in the first part, so it usually is the most feeling I have there is like, so, yeah, well, I think the point is it's, again, we're bullshitting people. We're telling them something to cover something up or to make them do something we want from them. Yeah, well, it's... I don't really even know what to say to this because it's something that's really frustrating to me. It's like, yeah, like going in the same direction of everything that, I don't know, the witch trials, everything. It's just like someone saying that it's religious and everyone else has to say hooray.
Oh, we are going to have so much more fun with you and how the show proceeds.
Second. I'm prepared. Let on.
Beautiful.
But I was just wondering, maybe we could... I mean, what's interesting here is that Delenn is part of the religious caste and she's very high up. Like, she's in the highest position that you can have politically as a Minbari. Delenn is a part of the religious caste here, so as a part of that group of Minbari that views religion and the values connected to that as very highly, as a high priority, as really as this glasses she sees the world through, also has to use this religious understanding in a way that kind of takes the magic away from it, I think, because she is really using it practically for a political play, for something that she thinks is necessary for the people, for Minbari society to have in that situation. So I think I found it interesting to see that if you climb up high enough in the religious caste, you look so far behind the curtain that it all just, you know what I mean?
what's interesting to me, and I think this is also what makes this interesting, because of course, Meike, I kind of know what to expect from you when it comes to topics like this, but what gives me hope that this maybe isn't just painful for you is this idea that we are, like you say, Layla, high enough in the hierarchy that none of the people involved with this religious miracle are getting conned by it. Like, Neroon was never going to sit there and awe and being like, oh my god, a miracle has happened. Like, he perfectly well knows that this is a story he's being told to cover up an obvious thing that she did, and he just has to accept it.
Yes, and that was the next step that I wanted to talk about. It's what you are going for, I think, is why, what could be her reasons? Why does she think that, besides, of course, just her responsibility for her old friend, but why does she think that this kind of religious miracle is something Minbar would swallow, and also that the society on Minbar at this point maybe actually needs? So why does she create this kind of miracle to then sell? I mean, maybe that's something we could talk about.
We will definitely...
Go ahead.
We'll definitely also keep this in mind as we see her going forward. What strikes me as interesting for her particularly is that she doesn't seem cynical about it. She's not sitting there like, yes, I have improved my own standing with the Grey Council by politicking my way through this. Like, when she talks about being religious caste, she always seems very genuine. She seems to take this faith seriously, so it's not just her manipulating the masses with some opium or something like that.
She really thinks that this is something that needs to be seen and heard at this point, that is needed.
Yeah, which is interesting. It doesn't make it less despicable per se, but...
I mean, it would make me cynical. If I would have climbed up in the religious caste to then kind of go through these kind of mind games, I would be completely cynical and give up probably. I would be drinking with Rondo at this point. So...
Which could be a funny thing.
Yeah.
No, but I think since she earlier said that was speaking of the rift between the castes, and if this is handled the wrong way, that it would even go further apart. I think this is her way of trying to connect both sides again, because if you think about it, one who was a warrior in the warrior caste, no matter what he was before, died as a warrior, and then, well, if you consider this miracle thingy really happening, it has this religious touch, and therefore, like the universe or whatever entity they have, or what you would phrase it like, or they would phrase it like, is seeing this major warrior as not a warrior, but as a religious person, a priest, and therefore his actions have a different weight and a different perspective. So yeah, I would see it as her trying to connect both sides with this action.
Because in a way, we again have a character who can connect both sides here. We have someone who can swoop in and change perspectives, because he was a priest and then he became a warrior, and burying him only as the one or the other thing is a difficult choice to make here. So here we have a connection in this society that is more and more going apart. And yeah, I mean, using a religion and creating a religious wonder to sell that to the masses is definitely something questionable, and I totally see how that. I mean, I just said it would make me cynical to be part of that, but I also think here the writing and how the stories are told already give a view on what religious is viewed as in Babylon 5. I think that it is this storytelling and making sense of the reality we live in, not in this way of it explains the world before we have science to explain it, but in this making sense of the reality we have, kind of.
And I go ahead.
It's just the two of us today, again and again and again.
On the same wavelength, but contradicting each other immediately.
I think what religion is in Babylon 5 so far, the most, you've already phrased it as make sense of the world, the universe. So it's more the spiritual way that is going there, which is technically the origin of the religious part. The spiritual thing is to find out who you are, what is your place in the world, what is it you're, well, let's say, supposed to do, in the sense of what is it that makes you happy, that helps the world, helps others in this kind of way. And I think even though we have this religious theme, most of the time it is going in this spiritual direction of how you phrased it, how to make sense of the world.
And this sort of fundamental way of approaching religion, for me, also helps me understand how she can do this without being very cynical about it, because the story that she tells of his body becoming disappeared by mystical means and transformed into something that couldn't either be buried as religious or warrior caste, this is a kind of story like you would imagine in the like very original theological sense of some of the most basic Bible stories, like creation story and stuff, where the point isn't that people read this story and believe it. The point isn't to be a giant con to convince people that that is literally what happened. The point is the message behind that, which Neroon can get. It's kind of this idea, like you already said, hey, here's this guy that was part of both castes, so we don't determine him to be either way. He can just become something higher of Minbari as a whole. And everybody hearing this story doesn't need to fully believe it, can also just read it as this much more practical sense. This is the action that was taken behind it. And when you have a religious story that isn't made up in a way to sort of prey on people that are easy to convince of miracles to give money to somebody, but if it's literally somebody that wants to convey a message, and no matter how much you can deconstruct the reality of the story, the message still remains intact and valid, at that point I can also see how she's fine with using this as a story, because then it's like, no, I don't need everybody to believe me. I just need them to get what I'm trying to tell them. And if the story helps them to do that, that's fine. But okay, we've talked about this first plot quite extensively now, and we don't want to keep Meike forever here. So maybe you want to take the lead on our secondary plot and then see how long you want to stick with us through that.
Yeah, well, it's not a big thing with the telepath girl Alisa, but I think it's a fine little something. There on one hand we have Talia back finally after years of missing her, and I think it's nice to see on both sides. We have Ivanova, we have Talia there, who are both trying in their own perspective the best thing for the new awakened telepath girl Alisa. And I really liked to see here that so far we just have seen the Psychops route, and that the Alisa here is really given a choice, and to see there are choices.
Yes.
And yeah, it's kind of a happy ending compared to what we've seen up until now, and especially in the context of Ivanova's mother and the reason why she's doing what she's doing. Yeah. Well, that's technically the most I would have to say to this. It was nice to see, and I think it was kind of just a way also to solve this situation with the missing body, and of course giving Sinclair at the end a new hint for his missing memories with the term chrysalis. I'm not sure.
Chrysalis. I also always say chrysalis.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of, if I read it, I kind of have to think of a flower or something.
Yeah. Like chrysanthemum.
Yes. Yeah, like kind of a thing.
Yeah, it really underlines also the importance, once again, of having a place like Babylon 5, where these options can be a thing, right? Like, you can easily imagine Susan's mother never had these choices because she was stuck on Earth somewhere. There's just nobody you can really turn to.
And especially if Alisa would have been on Earth, that wasn't something she would have been able to do either. Yeah. So, well, I don't think every telepath would have this option on Babylon 5. This girl is just really, really lucky to be there at this moment to awake her telepathic ability in this very moment, and Ivanova being right around the corner to see this and to help her.
And I think it's also the first time that we really get an answer to a question that we've asked very early on, this question of, well, Psycho kind of sucks, but what else are you going to do with telepaths, right? Like, it's this catch-22 where there is not really a good solution for having a bunch of people that are legitimately in need of special education and training and stuff, but then you can't really do that without segregating them and causing all of these issues. And this is the first time we see, well, humanity isn't alone anymore, and there are a bunch of different species that have very much experience with telepaths. So in theory, if you would open up human society a little bit more, many more people could get the different choices that Alicia had, and that would be very, very good.
At least for the humans, the Psycorps would be interested to eliminate that.
Of course.
Yes, I mean, you could think about what kind of future that promises for her, because I think living with the Minbari is probably not the worst. I think it's an interesting place for humans to be, even with only what we are aware now of, what we know about them now. But I think, I mean, you could think, will it ever be possible for her to enter human space? Will she ever be possible again to visit Mars, to visit Jupiter, to visit Earth? Or is that the point where Psychor will probably snatch her and put her on drugs or in prison? That is something to think about. And I mean, probably she may still be able to socialize with humans because she can go to the space stations, she can go to more intergalactic places, so she's not cut off. But under Earth's jurisdiction, I think she can never return.
It's kind of
she might be some kind of, you could think of this bit of an exile she's going to.
It
because
depends on the legality of it, right? If she becomes a Minbari citizen, then legally Psycho can't get her even if she wanders around on Earth. Would Psycho respect that, though? Is a different thing. Like,
Esther wouldn't, certainly not.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of this thing. Mr. Grey might, but Mr. Bester probably wouldn't. So it's definitely a complication.
It's definitely something to think about. We can't answer that for sure, I think, but it's definitely an interesting solution. Also, what I found interesting here was to see another version of how telepath can be treated. And it's interesting to note that Neroon don't have telepath. I mean, we already knew that from the pilot, but here it is pointed out again, they don't have telepath, and it's a big thing for them.
Yeah, and they were still very much working towards a solution and throwing money at the problem like crazy.
It's sad that we didn't see what Londo would propose for her. Somehow Ivanova didn't want to ask him.
I
kind of understand that. But honestly, I think this with the Neroon, or in this case, Natoth, throwing money at the telepath problem, it's such a Centauri thing to do.
Definitely. Although I feel like the Centauri would be more about trying to make money off it. They probably would still find a way to make this girl pay for getting protected there. So it would be involving more loans rather than straight up payment, I presume.
Also, I think if I were a telepath and I would choose a place that is not Earth, I feel like, maybe not as a child that has to learn to live with her abilities, but as an adult, I think that the Centauri homeworld would actually be kind of interesting. Because I think in their society, being the one who can read minds and being the one, I mean, it is dangerous, but it's also very cool to I think it would be cool to be a telepath there.
I mean, if we're talking about this topic, I have to say, I kind of don't like the way that the Neroon option is treated in here, because basically everyone is like, you definitely shouldn't go to the Neroon because they suck. But then this poor girl gets told this, well, you shouldn't go there because, see, their minds are alien, which is objectively not a bad thing. They are just very alien. And, their planet got bombed into oblivion. It is a radioactive wasteland now. Well, that's not the Neroon's fault. That's just one more reason to help them rebuild. Like, it's kind of
Yes, but honestly, I also always understood that she looked into Natha's minds and she just saw things that she didn't want to live with. Like maybe she saw what the world looked like. She saw just saw the images that would mean her daily life and was like, okay, no, thank you.
That is true, although 2 scenes later, the price got upped and she was very much on board again. So, I mean, she's also very much a teenager and very impressionable, right?
But also, if you think about the non-home world, what kind of person do you have to be, or what kind of person do you become if you live in such a world, if you grow up in such a world? So,
I mean, that is the thing. I mean, here, once again, we have a character who comes from the humans and goes to the Minbari as like a kind of connection. So here we have that theme again of switching perspectives, of being an interconnective point. And we see how that happened now a lot of times between humans and Minbari. And we see how that constantly fails if the Narn are involved. But also from the other side, also how everyone is like, no, not with the Narn. Maybe just make a mental note for how when we continue watching, what does that mean for the Narn? What is their fate in the near future?
I mean, as Kosh said very early on, they're the dying people alongside the Centauri, right? Like, even the Vordons are like, yeah, nah, these guys, don't try. It's not worth it. My favorite parts about this plot are actually not involved with the telepath girl at all, unfortunately. It's very character-based. For one, I feel like Susan and Talia are in a very different place than we last saw them. Like, the very first scene is them like exchanging looks across the bar, basically being like, we can't talk to each other normally, but we are also like kind of going to look at each other and like tentatively explore if there could be like any kind of normal social interaction. And then luckily the girl starts stealing, and so they have an excuse to break that off. But
we get into that hot. How did Ivanova put it?
It got a little bit hot in there, yeah. They basically spent this entire time, I said to Layla, they spent this entire episode as like basically bickering parents to this girl, like trying to decide which is best for her.
And it was such an emotional experience. Talia even got bangs along the way. I mean, she even got a new haircut.
Yes, it was a very transformative. No, I just like it because we haven't seen Talia in a while, but the implication is very clearly she has been interacting with the rest of the cast and their relationships have developed a little bit. Like, she's not as much of an outcast anymore than she was in the very beginning.
But also this interaction in the beginning of the episode, this just nod at each other, it's just respect.
Yeah.
It's I recognize you, I see you, even though I don't have anything to talk to you about, or maybe there isn't even anything, but I see you, I respect you, I honor you as a person. You are here, I see you.
Yes.
And I give you this space of existing in my presence. I mean, there are a lot of people who just, no, I don't see you, you're not there, and you can't see me if I don't look at you. And that's not what she's doing here. She's, facing the other one. And that's, even though if you don't get along in one way or another, that's respect.
But also how they scream. I mean, the reason why Susan didn't want to interact with Talia a lot was that she said that she has to be unfair. No matter how good as a person Talia would be, she would be unfair because of her background with the Psychor.
Mm.
And in this episode, we actually saw both of them screaming at each other over ways the Psychor hurt them. Mm-hmm. So I felt like when they were talking about Ironheart and about Ivanova's mother, there was kind of an understanding of, okay, now we are talking from the same kind of pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was very sweet.
It definitely levels the playing ground a little bit, where I think especially Susan is much more comfortable interacting because now she knows that there are similar levels of loss that she can talk about.
And I think what also really important is at this point that in the end, Talia is not stopping Elisa to go or anything, wishing her luck and everything, which gives Ivanova the perspective of, okay, she's not working against me, and not like the way Psycorps I have experienced. So I think this is also some kind of understanding she especially gained there.
It's definitely also a confirmation for her that Talia is making decisions of her own. And even if these decisions align with what Psychor would want, she doesn't always have to go all the way through with it. If she was just a mouthpiece for Psycho, she would have stopped the girl, definitely. But no, here you get the information. She recommends joining up with Psycho because she genuinely believes this is the best course of action. And if the girl decides otherwise, that is also fine, which is something that is aligned with Psycho, but not 100% that. And I think this is also like something she mentioned very early on. In line with this, I think this episode is also a very nice portrayal of Ivanova here, where we get 100% the confirmation Ivanova has a massive bias against Psycho. And she has been arguably even unfair in her treatment of telepaths when it comes to Mr. Grey or so, because if somebody is with Psycho, she's going to shut them out and going to be very antagonistic to them from the very beginning because she just can't deal with this organization. But this is not, and this is what we see in this episode, any kind of bias against telepaths in general, because this telepathic girl receives none of this antagonism, even after she massively invades Susan Ivanova's privacy and talks to her about her mother and stuff, something that she would never tolerate. But it's very clear here that she knows this girl has nothing to do with Psycho, and she doesn't put any of that baggage on her, which is nice to see, but also definitely something that not everybody would be able to do, making this distinction.
Any more on that plot?
I think there's not much more to say. Like, as it's not a big thing. It's more like a helping tool for the main plot, but also a nice, sweet in this episode to have.
A very short final thing I would add to that. We learn in this episode that this girl arrived on the station when she was 12. A year later, her father dies, and she has been living on her own and down below. And everybody is just kind of, yeah, that happens. And like, it's just like, if she hadn't been a telepath, she and like probably hundreds of other little girls and boys on the station would have continued living as street urchins. And that's just a fact of life on Babylon 5 that nobody really has the power to change. There's probably some kind of social services that are horribly underfunded, but this can just happen to you. If you're a kid brought to Babylon 5 and your parents die, well, that's too bad. The government is not going to pay for your shipment back or any other family to contact you or anything. It's just kind of bad luck then. And yeah, this is just, it always throws me that this is something that like multiple people in the command staff get told about, and they'd all just kind of have to acknowledge, yeah, that really sucks. There's nothing we can do about that. It's just how it works.
Yeah, no,
It's also not like they're quite emotional in a way. It felt a bit like, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I don't know, talking about the weather report or anything. I didn't feel there was much of emotion in there.
It's kind of like looking at the modern city and being like, yeah, so there's people here that just don't have any place to stay for the night, and they might freeze to death in this like oncoming winter. And so if you think about it, it's really messed up that this is just a fact of life that exists, but yeah, it kind of does. And yeah, on this space station, we are, yay, in the future among the stars, but that kind of stuff still happens, and people have just kind of arranged themselves with that. So yeah, I just this in this episode specifically, the reminder that lurkers are a thing on the station just throws me a little bit every time through it.
Yeah, I mean, we have gone so far, but we are still living in capitalism, so that still exists.
Yeah, there's still rent to be paid on the space station.
Oh, we have more episodes on that. Not to spoil or anything, but yeah, rent is a topic.
Yeah. But okay.
I'm sure I would be able to have a place to sleep there. I'm pretty sure I won't be able to offer that.
You would be among our lurkers, like we all would. I mean, this is why this is a pretty fitting community name that they've chosen. So, but okay, I think this leaves us pretty much with the tapestry. Or is there anything else that we haven't touched on that we should?
No. I think at this point you should make some picture thing with tapestry time.
I should have like this the more you know transition with tapestry time in there.
So, Meike, what do you think will come back to us? Or what of the character developments do you think we will see more of?
I think we kind of put it out here and there already in this in the discussion. So I'm not really sure if I'm able to summarize that.
You don't necessarily have to summarize, but maybe you can speculate a little more on things. For example, Chrysalis, what are these beautiful flowers are going to reveal about the hole in Sinclair's mind? Any speculations on that?
Well, I think when Elisa tells him that, then Sinclair says something about it, that it's meant to be a cocoon or something like that.
Who needs a cocoon?
Yeah, something for development to go to the next stage of evolution. I don't know. I really hope it's not something like the evolution part, because I'm not sure if I like this.
We will have to breed superhumans and make everything better.
No, but well, the most common picture you have if you talk about a cocoon is that, wrapped in silk or whatever cloth it is, and after some time you break out as a butterfly, a new being, and well, there are quite well, I don't suppose the Minbari turn into a butterfly, but though those butterfly wings would be quite cute on them, I think.
They have butterfly energy, yeah.
No, but there are if I have to think like Stargate, where you have I'm not sure what it was called, where
the ancients ascending.
The ancients ascending.
If it's anything like that, it's gonna be so obnoxious, because every single time that happens in that show, it's horrible.
Yeah, and it's on one hand it's super boring. On the other hand, you can't really explain it because it's supposed to be something really alien to you. So how do you explain something that doesn't exist?
Yeah.
So yeah, I really hope it's not something like that. I don't know. Maybe it's connected to something destructive, because the Neroon said something like all the species been wiped out. That is something that didn't happen. I mean, why do I get a Reaper feeling at this moment?
A little bit. I mean, it must be something, right, that is on Dylan's mind. Also, now that you mentioned Reaper, I think of like the Reaper larva, and so like everybody gets turned into goo and turned into a giant butterfly. That wouldn't be great.
Maybe at this point, for those who have no idea what we're talking about the video game Mass Effect. If you don't know it, change it.
Yeah, there has been like trailers coming out for the next one, so now is a great time to get into it back again. But I mean, maybe it's something more metaphorical, right? For me, the striking thing is Dylan talks in this episode about the growing rift between the warrior caste and the religious caste, and she talks about this very much like an inevitable thing, right? Like she does everything she can to limit this. So, Chrysalis transformation, maybe this is more metaphorically talking about the fact that the Minbari as a whole will have to transform, like the caste structure has to transform in some way because it's not functional anymore, it has been broken, something like this. Or, maybe what is happening right now is the growing pains into becoming something larger, like that.
Or going in a darker direction, like a civil war or something that would obviously affect everyone else, considering the resources and technologies the Minbari have.
Definitely. I mean, it's we just learned that the Minbari have put quite a lot of money into the Babylon project as well. So what happens if that, is gone? Will people try to replace Sinclair with somebody else or stuff like that? Like this would be a giant wrench into everything. In terms of other things that can be carried forward, looking maybe at our side plot a little bit, could this be the first inkling of Talia maybe getting pulled a little bit into Ivanova's direction when it comes to her stance on Psycho. Like, is this letting somebody go out away from Psycho somewhere else something that maybe she will follow the progress this girl makes and see, oh, there's different ways that we could deal with telepaths that are maybe not as intrusive or as authoritative.
You could think of this as a start of her detaching herself from Psycorps. I mean, we already have this little shadow in the corners of Psycorps of doing things that they shouldn't do.
Yes.
So there could be also something coming up in a bigger scale for Talia to make a choice of being with Psycorps or being no longer with them. So
this is just a small detail, but especially in the last scene when they are hugging the girl, in this episode, the fact that Talia always has the black gloves really stood out to me because it makes everything very artificial. Like, every time she interacts with this girl in like very normal ways, it's always with these gloves on, and it just highlights to me like there is such an artificial distance put between people by the way that Psycho approaches everything, this like emotional distance we talked about. So I could really see this moment being something that triggers in her the idea that, oh, that is wrong. Something is wrong here. This is not normal. This is not how you should treat children.
Though maybe we could also count it as the second step, considering Ironheart.
Yeah.
Though I'm still curious what's up with her new ability.
That would have been so great if the girl just looked at her. You're telekinetic, by the way. Everybody suddenly freaks out about it. But yeah, this is something. Now that we have confirmed Talia is still part of the cast, maybe we can continue with this storyline even. That would be great.
Well, at least she is, at the moment, part of the cast. Well, since I already heard that, there probably will be Natoth saying goodbye at some point. Why? I like her.
Tons and tons of makeup. It's in this case, and so fortunately this is not something you have to worry about with Talia, but yeah, everybody that is put in an alien suit has this problem that, if you're allergic against the glue, that kind of messes things up. But no, it was great to see Natoth again in this episode, and hopefully not for the last time. But yeah, I think these are the main threads. Of course, like with Sinclair, there's a whole lot more baggage about reconciling the Minbari War, finding out what happened, but I think our chrysalis is the most concrete thing we have on this right now. Other than that, I think this brings us pretty well into our outro section.
And back to our lurkers. What about the last questions or polls we put out? Is there anything to report on?
Yes, we did ask in the last episode how people feel about a little bit of Earth History 101, and I basically put the poll out as a question of what kind of format people are most interested in. Should this be something that we throw into our general discussions, like every time there's something that might be interesting, like next time New Jerusalem gets mentioned, I can go into the lexicon and like find that out, or if they should be separate, just in general videos on the history of Earth and other lore in the setting, or should those be specials? And people have been very avid in their interest in expanded lore videos on Babylon 5 in general, so it makes sense. Like, these books have been out of print for a little while, so people probably are interested in sort of the version of history that we are assuming here in our discussions about the setting. And other than that...
Don't be lying. They just want to see me making tests and fail horribly.
Well,
you have to take this test too. I make sure of it.
We will do this. So there's definitely, I'm very happy to say, not very many people that voted for the not interested at all category of this. So there's definitely some interest there. And I think the shape that this is going to take is that we are going to make these separate special things. Probably not full-length discussion episodes like this, because I don't want to force you into those. But they will probably be smaller topical chunks where we look at a certain aspect that is prevalent to the episodes that we are talking about, and it will cover a little bit of what does the expanded lore actually say, and then what can we talk about this, what makes this interesting.
There's nothing else to report. Then the question is like the one we asked or answered ourselves in the beginning: how would you get rid of a body? Fellas. And this means you have to write. There is no poll. You have to write with your fingers.
You have to type it out. And the last thing...
you can do this. I believe in you.
The last thing, not to report, but to say, is that we have a few interesting episodes ahead. The next one that we are going to have is going to be a double episode, where we are going to talk about the single two-parter of Season 1 as one big discussion, which might turn out a little bit longer, might not. So you should ready yourself for a doozy, because if they decided it's worth 2 episodes, it's going to be a big story. And as always, we will discuss it right here on our YouTube channel, as well as on all other platforms pretty much where you can find podcasts at the Third Age Podcast.
And of course, here on YouTube, we're the cutest, because here you can see us. As today, anyone who hasn't listened on YouTube today, I had cat ears today. So find us on YouTube, it's worth it.
Certainly, but of course we're everywhere on social media, like Facebook, Instagram, Mastodon since last week, and well, of course we're still on X, formerly known as Twitter. So yeah, if you want to tell us something about the questions we've asked or the things we're discussing in general in this episode or any other episode, please write us. We're really happy to see any kind of comments. Well, not any kind, but the important kind. You know what I mean. So yes, please write to us, share, and give us a like. If you like this episode, if there's something you don't like, you can write this also, but in a nice way. We want critic. It's not some bad mouthing. So thank you for tuning in. We hope you had a very interesting time listening to us, and hopefully until next time.